Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon usually feels like a playground of laughter, silly games, and harmless banter. But on this night, the stage turned into something far more intense. Jimmy Fallon, ever the prankster, thought he could sneak in a light joke about Nicolas Cage's infamous financial troubles. The audience chuckled, Fallon smirked, and it seemed like just another late-night gag. But Nicolas Cage didn't laugh. He leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Fallon, his voice low but sharp. "Say this again?" The crowd froze. The air shifted from playful to piercing. Fallon's grin faltered as Cage held his gaze, making it clear this wasn't just a bit for the cameras. The tension was thick, the kind of silence that feels louder than any punchline. And that's where it all began, a late-night talk show transforming into a battleground of pride, frustration, and raw emotion. What started as comedy quickly spiraled into confrontation, leaving the audience and viewers at home wondering if they were watching the most explosive moment in Tonight Show history. Because when Nicolas Cage says, "Say this again," you know you're about to witness something unforgettable.
The Tonight Show set was buzzing as usual, drenched in neon blues and warm spotlight golds. Jimmy Fallon bounced in his chair with that trademark boyish grin, while Nicolas Cage sat across from him, shifting in his seat like a man who had already endured too many questions for one lifetime. The interview began harmlessly enough. Fallon teased Cage about his eccentric film roles, the internet memes, and that time he bought a two-headed snake. The crowd laughed. Cage smiled faintly, playing along with the absurdity. But then Fallon leaned in, lowering his voice for comedic effect. "You know, Nick, I gotta ask, did you really blow through all that Hollywood money? Like castles, rare artifacts, dinosaurs? What's next? Buying the moon?" The audience erupted. Fallon leaned back, satisfied with the punchline. But Cage's smile disappeared. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to look directly at Fallon. The laughter trickled off as people noticed the shift. Cage wasn't amused. His voice, low and deliberate, cut through the room like a blade. "Say this again." The audience gasped. Fallon's grin faltered for the first time all night. He laughed nervously, waving his hand as if to brush off the moment. "Aw, come on, Nick. You know I'm just joking. That's what we do here." But Cage didn't move. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Fallon like a predator who had finally decided to stop playing. "You think it's funny? Years of people dragging my name through mud, making me into some kind of cartoon character? I'm sitting here, Jimmy, and you think this is a joke?" The studio was silent now. Fallon's usual control of the crowd slipped from his fingers. He tried to recover, laughing a little too loudly. Hey, no, man, we love you. We're all fans here. You're a legend." Cage didn't smile. "Fans don't laugh at your pain." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Fallon's cue cards, once tools for harmless comedy, now looked flimsy in his hands. He tried to pivot. "Well, Nick, I mean, you've had such an incredible career. Face Off, Con Air, National Treasure." But Cage cut him off. "And yet you go straight to the gossip, not the craft, not the decades of work. You want the meme version of me." The words landed heavy. People in the crowd glanced at one another, unsure if they were supposed to laugh, clap, or stay quiet. Fallon cleared his throat, trying to regain footing. "Well, Nick, I mean, people love you because you're unique, unpredictable. That's part of the fun." Cage tilted his head, a bitter smile playing at his lips. "Fun for who? For you? For late-night audiences? I'm not a circus act, Jimmy." It was no longer an interview. It was a reckoning. Fallon, usually the king of keeping things light, found himself pinned under Cage's intensity. The tension wasn't staged, and everyone knew it. The cameras captured every flicker of discomfort, every ounce of raw emotion. And somewhere in that silence, the sparks had caught flame. What began as a playful jab had turned into something far more dangerous, an unfiltered confrontation, live on national television. Fallon swallowed hard, realizing that for once, he wasn't the one running the show.
The air inside the studio felt different now, heavy, as if the laughter had been sucked out of the room. Fallon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, that easy grin of his wobbling as he realized Cage wasn't letting this go. The audience, once primed to laugh at anything, sat on edge, waiting to see if Fallon could turn things around. Jimmy raised his hands in mock surrender. Okay, Nick, I hear you. No more jokes about castles, no more dinosaur skulls. Let's keep it professional. He chuckled nervously, scanning the crowd for backup. A few people laughed, but it was thin, forced. Cage leaned back, folding his arms, but his stare never left Fallon. Professional? You invited me here to mock me? To turn me into a headline tomorrow? Cage melts down on Fallon? That's what you wanted, right? The audience gasped. Fallon quickly shook his head. No, come on, man, that's not what this show is about. We're here to celebrate you. Cage raised an eyebrow. Celebrate me? By reducing my life to a punchline? His voice was calm but sharp, each word weighted. You think it's funny, Jimmy, when people struggle? When they lose money, lose dignity, lose years of their life trying to rebuild? Fallon looked flustered. He tried to pivot, desperate for an escape hatch. Nick, buddy, we've all had ups and downs. I mean, look at me. I trip over words every night. My impressions bomb. Don't compare dropping a joke to losing everything you've worked for, Cage interrupted, his tone cutting through Fallon's ramble. You get applause when you mess up. I got headlines. I got laughed at by people who couldn't survive 1 week in my shoes. The audience murmured, some nodding, others looking at Fallon expectantly. The balance of sympathy was shifting, and Fallon felt it. His show, usually a playground of easy humor, had turned into a battlefield. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. Nick, I wasn't trying to hurt you. Honestly, people love hearing about your wild side, the adventures, the risks. It's part of your legend. Legends aren't clowns, Jimmy. Legends aren't mocked. You know what legends are? They're respected. A ripple of applause came from the audience. Fallon blinked, startled by it. The sound of people siding with Cage rattled him. He pressed on, trying to steer things back. Okay, then let's talk respect. You've done incredible work. Oscar-winning performances, roles that inspired a generation of actors. Nobody's taking that away from you. But Cage wasn't easing up. You already did, with your joke. Fallon swallowed, his throat dry. He glanced at the band, at the cameras, at the producers off stage. They were giving him nothing. He was on his own. Look, Fallon said, forcing a smile. Nick, maybe I crossed the line, but Nick, you've got to admit, you've made some eccentric choices. The castles, the exotic animals, the choices that were mine to make, Cage shot back. Do you know what it's like to have everything you do dissected? Every risk you take turned into gossip fodder? You sit here night after night, poking fun at people, but what have you risked? What have you put on the line? The audience clapped louder now. Cage's words had teeth, and they were sinking in. Fallon opened his mouth, then closed it again, the weight of Cage's accusation hitting him harder than he expected. Nick, I don't know what to say, Fallon admitted, his voice quieter. Cage leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them. Say this. that people aren't their mistakes. Say this, that behind every joke you tell about me, there's a man who's still working, still fighting. Say this, Jimmy." Fallon's smile was gone now. The mask had slipped. He looked genuinely shaken, and the audience knew it. They were no longer here for comedy. They were witnessing a raw confrontation, something real in a world built on scripted laughs. "Nick," Fallon said slowly, carefully, "you're right. I owe you that respect. You're not a meme. You're not a punchline. You're Nicolas Cage." The crowd erupted in applause. Cage gave the smallest nod, but his eyes still burned with intensity. Fallon, rattled but trying to regain composure, forced a laugh. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I guess I just got caged." A few nervous chuckles echoed, but most of the audience wasn't laughing. The tension lingered, thick and unrelenting. Fallon had tried to pull the mood back into comedy, but Cage had taken the reins, and he wasn't giving them up.
The clash wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. The studio had shifted into unfamiliar territory. Viewers who tuned in for a lighthearted late-night romp were now sitting in stunned silence, watching Nicolas Cage unravel a side of himself rarely seen on television. Fallon, usually master of the room, had been reduced to awkward nods, his trademark smile strained thin. Cage, sensing the audience leaning toward him, didn't waste the momentum. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice deep and steady. "You want to know why I made those choices, Jimmy? Why I bought castles, why I spent money I didn't have? It wasn't because I'm reckless. It was because I thought I could give my family, my children, a story. A life where they'd look back and say, 'My dad lived. He lived without fear.'" The crowd murmured, a sympathetic wave washing through them. Fallon looked uneasy, but Cage pressed on. "You joke about dinosaur skulls. You know why I bought that? Because my son loved them. He was a kid obsessed with paleontology, and when I could, I wanted to give him the world. I didn't care if it made headlines or if people whispered behind my back. I cared about seeing his eyes light up when he saw it." There was a pause, a soft gasp from somewhere in the audience. Fallon's posture softened, guilt flashing in his eyes. Cage's voice trembled slightly, the intensity cracking into something raw. "Do you know what it's like, Jimmy, to have your worst years played as comedy clips? To have people cheer for your downfalls like they're rooting for a punchline? When I lost money, when I sold homes, when I scraped by just to keep going, people laughed. People like you laughed." Fallon's hand shot to his chest as if wounded, but he stayed silent. For once, the king of quick comebacks had nothing. Cage continued, his eyes scanning the audience now, no longer just Fallon. "But I never stopped working. I never stopped showing up. I made movies nobody believed in because I believed in them. And I tell you this, every time I stepped on a set, I wasn't doing it for headlines. I was doing it for the craft, for the people who still cared. That's who I am. That's who I've always been." The audience erupted in applause, many standing. Fallon blinked rapidly, caught off guard by the wave of support flooding toward Cage. Cage let the noise wash over him, then spoke again, his voice quieter now, more intimate. "Jimmy, you're a father too. Would you laugh if someone mocked you for how much you sacrifice for your kids? Would you sit back while people turn your struggles into late-night monologues?" Fallon's lips parted, but no sound came out. His face had softened. His eyes darted downward. He looked less like the untouchable host and more like a man being confronted with something uncomfortable and true. The silence stretched. The weight of Cage's words filled the room until Fallon finally whispered, "No, I wouldn't." Cage nodded slowly, his anger tempered now by something heavier, vulnerability. "Then don't do it to others. Don't do it to me." The audience clapped again, louder this time, not out of politeness, but out of resonance. Fallon sat back, exhaling, visibly shaken. His hand ran through his hair as he muttered, "Man, this is not where I thought tonight was going." Cage let out a small, humorless laugh. "Neither did I, but sometimes the truth shows up whether you invite it or not." The band sat frozen, unsure whether to play a cue. The producers offstage looked frantic, but the crowd was glued to every word. For the first time in years, late-night TV felt unscripted, dangerous, alive. Cage leaned back, crossing his arms, a man who had bared his soul but still held fire in reserve. Fallon, humbled, swallowed hard and tried to regain footing. "Nick, you've been through hell and back. I respect that. I really do. But people also laugh because they love you. They laugh because you're larger than life." Cage tilted his head. "Or maybe they laugh because it's easier than respecting someone who refuses to quit." The crowd roared with approval, the studio echoing with cheers. Fallon's attempt to soften the blow had only fueled Cage's point. He sat there, cornered, nodding faintly, as if conceding the round. In that moment, the balance of power on The Tonight Show had shifted completely. Fallon's stage belonged to Cage now, and the audience knew it. The emotional flashpoint had arrived, and it was far from cooling down.
The applause from the audience still echoed when Jimmy Fallon leaned forward, clinging to any shred of control he could reclaim. His trademark grin was gone, replaced with the uneasy half-smile of a man backed into a corner. "Nick," he said, his voice a little sharper now, "I get it. You've been through a lot, but you've got to understand this is a comedy show. People tune in to laugh, not to sit in therapy." The room gasped. It was subtle, but the shift was immediate. Cage's jaw clenched, and even Fallon knew he had said too much. "Therapy?" Cage repeated, his voice low, dangerous. "You think my life is a punchline and my truth is therapy? You invited me here to talk, and now you can't handle it when I do." Fallon's hands flailed defensively. No, that's not what I meant. I'm just saying, this is The Tonight Show. People want lighthearted fun, not—" Cage shot forward in his chair, his eyes blazing. "Not honesty? Not reality? You'd rather dress everything up in skits and fake laughter than face something real?" The crowd clapped and cheered, feeding the fire. Fallon's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being the villain on his own stage. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "Nick, you're blowing this way out of proportion." That was the breaking point. Cage stood up, towering over Fallon, his presence commanding. The audience erupted, some cheering, others gasping, as the camera struggled to keep up. "Out of proportion?" Cage barked. "I've spent decades giving everything I had to this industry. Blood, sweat, tears, all of it. And what do I get? Mockery, headlines, a host who can't resist making me the butt of his jokes." Fallon jumped up too, trying to defuse the moment, but his voice cracked. "Nick, come on. This isn't how we do things here." But Cage wasn't sitting. He turned to the crowd, pointing toward them as if rallying an army. "They laugh with me, Jimmy. They understand. You laugh at me." The audience erupted again, some even chanting Cage's name. Fallon's eyes darted to the band, to the producers waving frantically off stage, but no one dared interrupt. The show had spiraled far beyond their control. "Nick," Fallon said, his voice tightening, "I've had dozens of guests on this stage, big stars, bigger egos, but nobody's ever turned it into a circus like this." Cage's eyes narrowed, his voice booming. "Circus? The only clown I see is the man who thinks respect is a punchline." The room exploded with cheers, whistles, and gasps. Fallon's face fell, and for the first time he looked genuinely rattled. Humiliated, he forced a laugh, but it cracked. "All right, Nick, you win. You've hijacked my show. Congratulations." Cage tilted his head, his tone dripping with venom. "No, Jimmy, I didn't hijack your show. I reminded you it's not yours to control. It belongs to the people who watch, the people who deserve truth, not canned laughter. The standing ovation that followed was deafening. Fallon, desperate, tried to interject, raising his voice over the cheers. Okay, enough. This is supposed to be fun. Fun. His voice broke, cracking under the pressure. Not whatever this is. The crowd's energy shifted. Some booed, others kept chanting Cage's name. Fallon looked out into the sea of faces and realized he had lost them. His stage, his sanctuary was gone. Cage leaned closer, his voice low enough to cut, but loud enough for the microphones. Maybe, Jimmy, it's time you learn that not everything needs to be fun. Sometimes people need to hear the truth, even if it burns. The crowd roared once more. Fallon stood frozen, shoulders slumped, sweat glistening on his forehead. The once unflappable host looked small next to Cage, who stood tall and resolute, a man who had just flipped the entire script of late-night television. The producers finally cut to commercial, the band playing awkwardly as the studio descended into chaos. But the damage was done. Fallon had cracked. Cage had risen. And everyone watching knew they'd just seen a moment that would live forever in late-night infamy. The breaking point had been reached, and nothing about The Tonight Show would ever feel the same again.
When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio wasn't the same place it had been at the start of the night. The audience buzzed like they just witnessed a scandal unravel in real time. Some people were on their feet, clapping, others whispering frantically to each other, phones already in hand, ready to blast the moment onto Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube before the show even wrapped. Fallon sat back down, dabbing his forehead with a cue card, his grin nowhere to be found. He tried to collect himself, but the energy in the room made it impossible. Across from him, Nicolas Cage remained standing for a moment longer, letting the ovation crash around him like a wave before he finally sank back into his chair. He looked calm now, almost serene, as though the storm inside him had passed. The cameras flickered back on, the red light glowing, and Fallon forced a half smile. "Well," he said, voice trembling, "that was something." The audience laughed. Not with him, but at the absurd understatement. Cage simply nodded, leaning into his microphone. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the truth isn't entertaining, but it's necessary." That line landed like a hammer. The crowd erupted again, cheers drowning out the band trying to smooth over the awkwardness with a soft riff. Fallon nodded stiffly, but his usual quick wit had abandoned him. He muttered, "We'll be right back," and the screen cut to another break. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled, some furious, others secretly thrilled at the viral moment they knew they had on their hands. Within minutes, hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Cage versus Fallon, hashtag Say This Again, and hashtag Respect Nicolas Cage. Clips of the exchange flooded timelines, fans dissecting every glare, every pause, every stumble Fallon made. Back in the studio, Fallon tried to regain footing as the show limped toward its closing segment, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. He cracked jokes, but the laughter was polite, empty. Cage sat quietly, still present, but no longer fiery, as though he had said all that needed to be said. By the time the credits rolled, Fallon looked drained, his eyes darting nervously at the crowd. Cage, on the other hand, stood tall, waving graciously to the audience, who rewarded him with another ovation. He didn't need to gloat. He had already won. The fallout hit fast. Headlines the next morning screamed, "Nicolas Cage brings Fallon to his knees on The Tonight Show." Cage destroys Fallon. Say, "Not everything needs to be fun." Say this again? Cage turns late night into courtroom drama. Commentators split instantly.
Some praised Cage for his vulnerability and courage. Others criticized him for hijacking a comedy show. But the public? They leaned hard in his favor. Clips racked up millions of views overnight. Fans who had once turned Cage into a meme now called him a legend reborn, rallying behind his honesty. Social media lit up with reactions. Fallon thought he could make a cheap joke. Cage turned it into a sermon. Iconic. This is the most real thing I've ever seen on late night. Respect Nicolas Cage. Fallon looked like a deer in the headlights. Cage owned that stage. Even celebrities chimed in. Some defended Fallon, but more applauded Cage. He's right. We've all been mocked for choices people don't understand. Takes guts to say what he did. Meanwhile, Fallon's PR team scrambled. By the next evening, he issued a half apology during his monologue. Hey, I love Nicolas Cage. Always have, always will. Last night, things got heated. But that's live TV, right? No hard feelings. He tried to laugh it off, but the damage lingered. The clip wasn't going anywhere. For Cage, the moment became a strange kind of vindication. A man once laughed at for his eccentricities had reclaimed the narrative, turning late-night TV into his pulpit. He didn't need to argue further. The world had heard him loud and clear. In living rooms across America, people talked about it like it was more than just a spat. Older fans nodded along, saying, "He's right, people shouldn't be mocked for their struggles." Younger viewers shared memes immortalizing Cage's glare and his unforgettable demand, "Say this again." And that, perhaps, was the legacy of the night. Nicolas Cage had reminded everyone that behind the jokes and headlines was a man who had lived boldly, stumbled, but never quit. Fallon had walked into the clash with punchlines, but Cage walked out with something far heavier: respect. The Tonight Show would eventually move on, but this confrontation would live on in reruns, online clips, and cultural memory. And for anyone who doubted Nicolas Cage, that night was proof that under the eccentric legend was a fighter who refused to be the punchline ever again. If you enjoyed this dramatic showdown, make sure to subscribe for more unforgettable celebrity clashes, viral talk show moments, and stories that prove live TV is never truly predictable. Drop a comment below. Do you think Fallon was out of line, or did Cage go too far? Because one thing's for sure, nobody will ever forget the night Nicolas Cage told Jimmy Fallon, "Say this again."